All right, I'm gonna start us off. I think I have enough to drink to get us through the first 30 minutes at least, maybe 15.
Okay, I think I have a 30 minutes worth.
30 minutes worth. All right. You sure you don't want to top off?
It's kind of it's a cocktail, so I have to go. It would take 5 minutes to go.
All right. In that case, we'll just get started. Welcome to Unqualified Opinion, the podcast with rants almost as good as the homeless guy on your street corner. How's it going, Scott?
I have this drink that has a bunch of mint in it, but the mint is too small, and it's getting all up in my teeth, and it kind of makes it uncomfortable to drink it. So I'm kind of preoccupied. I'm trying to pick out the little pieces of mint.
You want to explain the drink?
Well, so the drink has a bit of a backstory. Actually, it does. I'm going to skip the backstory. Never mind. It's not
important. You can't say that because then I'd have to go back and edit the part where you said that. So now you have to say it. Just tell the backstory.
And now I have to say the backstory? Well,
I don't want to edit
it has to do with sex. It has to do with sex.
All your stories have to do with sex, Scott. It's fine.
Sex.
We already know that.
Well, it doesn't. It has to do with a girl, which basically has to do with sex. Oh, his topics. We're talking about masculinity today. That's not a good start.
No, let's go with it. Just roll with it.
Not a good start. So, this girl was going to come over, and I was at the liquor store, and I'm like, I need something cheap, that I can whip together, and get us drunk. And so I reached for gin, which I don't know why, because I don't really like gin.
Gin is disgusting.
But it was on sale. And now this actually it's not a whole thing of gin anymore. It's mostly gone in 2 days. I don't know how that happened. And I'm like, well, I have gin, and I have limes, and I have mint. I have a mint plant outside that I planted. Like, what if I made a mint julep with gin? And I looked it up, and it's actually a thing. So back when mint juleps first started, now they're made with bourbon exclusively, but they actually made them with gin as well. It was an option. So like, they don't do that anymore. I understand why they don't do it anymore, because it's not that good.
But that's what you made.
So, because I don't like gin, and like no matter what you do to it, it still tastes like gin. So that's the story. It was a happy ending last night, thanks to the nearly empty now bottle of gin.
Oh,
partly.
Congrats. Who was this girl?
Online acquaintance.
Oh, is this the one from earlier?
There's a lot from earlier that kind of rotate in and out. And she's on her rotation.
How many Tinder girls do you have rotating right now?
Only like 3.
Oh my god.
Only like 3. Well, one of them is now in a relationship, so
2.
That was kind of disappointing. It's only 2 now.
You gotta get that third one. You gotta find a new third one to get back into balance.
I know. I need that new third one. Well, here's the problem. Okay, I know we have to get to the topic really soon, but here
I haven't even talked about my drink yet. I don't know what you're talking about.
I have this existential issue when it comes to this girl, because I don't know where she gets it, but she has a lot of weed.
Like she's a big pothead?
No, she's not. She's very classy about it. She has a little jewel thing, and she's kind of classy. I mean, she's a lawyer, so she has to be a little classy. But she'll come over, we'll get drunk, and then she's like, "Do you want to smoke?" I'm like, "Sure." Okay, when I'm high and drunk, I don't feel like having sex. I'm just like,
really?
Oh, yeah. I'm just like, can we just cuddle?
Have you had sex high before? It's great.
It's a lot of work.
No, it feels amazing.
I find it to be a lot of work.
I mean, yeah, because you're so lazy when you're smoking, sure. But that's what the alcohol is for. The alcohol is supposed to keep you energized just enough that sex feels worth it. And then you're high, so every experience is accentuated. And so it's just like a more full, like, mental experience.
Well, perhaps for some, but I just want to sleep. And so we're in bed cuddling, and I could tell she really wanted to have sex. I'm like, oh, god damn it.
So you did, reluctantly.
I did. Reluctantly. Are you happy now?
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to hand over the dick.
My jeez.
You just gotta serve it up to satisfy.
No, I'm like, can you be on top?
Can I not move in this exchange?
I'm like, it was nice though. She's
talk about first world
nice
problems. Body. I was too high off of fancy weed to want to have sex, but I had to anyway. Oh god, my life is so hard. Could you imagine the experience? I mean, I just had to sit there, really, but still, I had to think about it.
I had to think about keeping it up because I just wanted to go to sleep. And I'm like,
that is always rough though, because there's circumstances in which it's like it's really not you. It's just that the circumstance makes this a little bit of a chore. Okay, I don't like TMI. Like I don't want to get into this, but do you ever have those issues where you're having sex with a girl and she's having a great time, but you can't seem to finish? Yeah, and then you start feeling bad because it's like you want to finish, not even for yourself anymore. It's like you want her to feel the self-validation of like you finished because she's attractive and you like her, and it's like of course I like you and I think you're attractive, but we've been at it now for like 40 minutes and it's just not gonna happen. Like nothing you do is going to make this happen, and I don't know how to say we should just stop. Because it's not gonna make me feel, it's not gonna make me feel bad of you, and it shouldn't make you feel embarrassed. But I don't want to say anything. You know? You ever get that?
I have. I usually.
What do you do in those circumstances?
Well, it takes a while to come anyway, and so if I'm more open with them, I'll just say if I don't come, I don't care. And that seems to, if it's the right person, they get it.
Yeah.
And it's not really an issue.
That's good. Yeah, just being open about it. Just be like, hey, look, it's not a big deal. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess we should say for guys who have never had this problem because they come way too quickly, couple of tips. The first one is just have more sex. Like you'll get over it, right? The second one is if you really are having a problem with the first 2 minutes, right? Know that if you get past those first 2 minutes, you're going to be able to go for a really long time. And the trick to getting past those 2 minutes is focus on a different sensation. So the one that I do is I take my tongue and on the roof of my mouth, I draw a circle with my tongue. And I focus on doing that over the first minute or two.
What the fuck,
and then
Steve?
If you focus on that sensation, you get through the first 2 minutes without coming, and then you can go on for a lot longer. This is what I used to do when I was a lot younger. Now it's at the point that I don't have to do that anymore. But if anyone's having a problem with it...
It's just a downhill from here, Steve.
No, now I'm having the opposite problem where it's like, it's taking way too long to come. Alright, this spiraled out of control. I'm going to talk about my drink. Okay, so...
Yeah, go for it.
So when I'm drinking... I'm getting back to trying to be at least a little bit classier since Scott called me out on the last episode for drinking way too much Miller Lite or whatever it was. So what I'm drinking right now is a mixture of Knob Creek bourbon with Disaronno Amaretto. So I would like to say that it's 2 parts whiskey to 1 part amaretto, but really it's just an arbitrary number of pours of one to the other until it tastes pretty good, and then 3 or 4 pieces of ice, so on the rocks. And it's really good. I've been getting into this thing where you take a whiskey base and then you put some kind of sweet alcoholic liqueur on top of that. And amaretto is a really good option. The almond flavor is really nice. It pairs really nicely. I'm a whiskey guy. I like drinking whiskey on the rocks, but sometimes it's nice to switch it up and just have something a little bit sweeter. So it's pretty good.
I don't like hard alcohol, really. I'm coming to realize.
You don't. Does this count?
I much prefer wine.
Okay, so even in a cocktail.
Yes, a cocktail has hard.
I thought you meant like straight alcohol, but.
Oh no,
but
no,
you mean like
any
configuration of hard alcohol? You're not a fan of.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, one, I think they're really hard to make well. I don't like straight. I can't. Even if it's really good, I just don't like the burning feeling.
Speaking of masculinity, that makes you not a man.
Yeah, I don't like it straight. That was a good one.
Oh God.
And I think I like mixed drinks, but it's hard to do it right. I went to this bar yesterday with this girl. We have like this profusion in the Twin Cities of craft distilleries, and this is one of the better known ones. And you know, they make these like really fancy cocktails, but you drink it and you're like, this stuff. It's like either too sweet, or like different flavors are too pronounced, or it's not sweet enough, or it's too something, or not enough of another thing. It's such an art, and I've only ever had cocktails that I really like I think I took you there, Steve. It's Marvel Bar. It's like that behind that unmarked door in North Minneapolis. We went down. Oh yeah,
it's like a hidden bar.
It's dark. It's hidden bar.
It's like a speakeasy kind of thing.
It's like a speakeasy. Yeah. And what they do, what I really like, is they don't go crazy. Their cocktails don't have 10 different ingredients in them. They go with the basics.
High quality.
But they do it with high quality, and they do it so well. It's high quality, limited menu, more simple drinks. That's good. But these places like throw everything in the kitchen sink. It's just like, what does it even taste like? I don't know what this tastes like anymore.
The other thing is also that everything, I think you already said this, but so many places just make all their cocktails way too sweet. It's almost like you look through the entire list and there's nothing that isn't super sweet on there. It's like, well, at that point, right. I don't want any of these. I'm not going to get a cocktail.
And that's the other thing. Like, the sweetness. That was this place. 20 drinks on their menu, probably. There were 2 that weren't sweet. There were 2 with no sugar.
That's ridiculous.
Oh, there were 18 of them that had sugar in it. And I'm like...
That's why I tend to like the whiskey drinks that restaurants make for cocktails. They tend to be less sweet and darker.
Yeah.
Right? It's usually just like some kind of whiskey and just a small number of ingredients, right? Some kind of whiskey base, maybe a liqueur, definitely some bitters, maybe one additional ingredient on top of that.
Mm-hmm. So. Do we want to introduce the topic?
Yeah, go for it.
We've hinted at it. So today we're talking about masculinity, and it's a full disclosure. We tried doing this before. And it turned out really bad. So bad. You might be surprised. It was so bad that it wasn't even put online.
Considering what we put online, our bar's pretty low, and yet we still found it so bad that we had to take this one off.
I feel that it was awkward. We didn't quite know what we were talking about or which direction to talk about. It was just weird. It was all over the place. Well, I thought the topic was dead, and Steve today suggested we try it again. I think it might go better. So I just want to say something that's been on my mind. So we're in the middle of what's called the Me Too movement, and looking at sexual harassment of women. And first off, I completely believe and agree with the sentiment behind it. I mean, I don't want to ever downplay the experiences women face. And at the same time, I find it's a hard conversation to have without, in some ways, and might sound odd, but desexualizing women. It's like women historically in our society and in Western society and in most societies have been viewed as, it's that you're either it's a slut or a virgin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I think society still needs to come to terms with the fact, men are understood to be sexual all the time. And to talk about women as being sexual, while it is true, also in the media at least, maybe contradicts a little bit some of the narrative around the Me Too movement, where women are being abused by men. They're two different conversations. They're separate issues, but I feel that the two are being pushed together.
So I want to be really clear.
Go for it.
So I want to understand what you're saying as clearly as possible. So what you're saying that the idea of so putting forth the notion that women can be sexual and can have kind of covert sexuality in their engagements is somehow recognizing that somehow undermines what's happening in the Me Too movement, because some people see a recognition of there being some covert sexuality in engagements of women when they engage with men as an allowance of men to take on some like atrocious behavior around abusing and engaging with women in an overtly sexual way in the workplace, that it's almost seen as if admitting that women can have this side to that is somehow not allowed in the current rhetoric because of the prevalence of the Me Too movement, because it somehow says, oh, are you saying that women deserve to be treated this way by certain men? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I would say the last piece you said, I think, hit it. So with the Me Too movement and how the media is talking about it, it is hard at the same time to say women are also sexual. And I'm not conflating is women being sexual somehow invites men to abuse them. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that talking about women being sexual could and has, I've seen in the media, been used as a justification for saying, well, they were asking for it.
Which is a terribly unfair perspective to have, right? Because when you talk about men being sexual, that same dynamic is never expressed, right? You never say, oh, sorry, the siren, I'm just going to wait for it to pass. This is going to be shit to edit, right?
DC life.
I know, right? Seriously. So where was I? So, sorry, I don't even remember what I was saying because the fucking thing distracted me. Sorry, where were we?
Oh, it's a double standard.
It's hypocritical.
Yeah,
it's hypocritical to be able to treat men as if they can be sexual all the time, but when you treat women as sexual beings, that can be used as a justification for men's inappropriate sexual advancements in the workplace or other places.
Right. I think it, and okay, so I'm going to just jump right in. I think there's a lot of other aspects we can look at, but I'm going to jump right into the sexual part because I find that one of those interesting pieces of this. Mm-hmm. And that, so I have had sex with women who really like being dominated. And I'm not going to go into what that entails. Because, this is a PG podcast.
No, it isn't.
But
no, it isn't. Are you kidding me?
I'm joking. I'm not going into all that now. That could be a different topic, a different podcast.
That would be an interesting podcast topic. Let's skip it for now.
That would be a very interesting, and I'll say less than vanilla sex.
Mm-hmm.
And it is hard for me, as someone who's very conscious and has been brought up in a very liberal little world, to take a really dominant role in bed to the level that they may want me to. Because I'm like, am I hurting you? Are you okay? And they're like, don't ask me that.
Yeah, you're ruining the moment by asking.
You're ruining the moment. And I'm like, but I want to make sure you're okay. And
yeah, I've been asked by a girl to kind of choke her while we have sex. And there's a really big part of me that's just very uncomfortable with that idea. It feels like it's very, very inappropriate behavior. So I know what you're saying, yeah.
And I think part of that has to do with this idea that women are gentle and, virginal and all of this, and doesn't give them agency in bed. And I will say that is why I'm bisexual. You never, ever, ever have that issue with men. It's like, if someone wants me to choke them, I'm like, I'll do it as hard as you want.
Until you say the safe word.
Until you say the safe word. Like, no, I'm not holding back at all. And it makes for a lot more fun, in a lot of cases, and engaging sex, because you aren't having this little voice in the back of your head saying, oh my god, is this appropriate? Am I hurting them?
But what it also does, which I think is interesting, and it doesn't come up in a lot of kind of modern liberal debates about gender dynamics, is it reinforces certain sexual roles in this bed place environment, right? So traditional, like, kind of sexual roles between male and female partners, such that the woman is more submissive and the man is more dominant, and that being so clearly defined within the bedroom is not something that I think a lot of liberals who want to see pure equality between sexes are comfortable with, right?
Right.
And so, but the bedroom is like a really clear dynamic, and then it becomes this weird cognitive dissonance between the liberal notions of wanting to allow for free expression in any kind of environment, right? And so and then having that free expression naturally lead toward biological tendencies toward separation of responsibilities and roles between men and women.
Right.
And not to deviate from your point, but I think that this does get into the very, very controversial and uncomfortable conversation around what the differences are between men and women, because I think there's this popular idea in at least more radical areas of the left that the genders are perfectly equal and exactly the same, that gender is a social construct, that there's no biological basis to it, and that if you had a little girl and a little boy and you treat them exactly the same as they grow up, that they'll grow up into exactly the same kind of human being with similar interests. And not to burst anyone's bubble or anything, and I think it's crazy that this is now a controversial opinion for some people. That's just not the case. That's just not going to be the case. There are biological differences between men and women. Men have 12 to 16 times the level of testosterone of women. And if you don't think that that's going to change a man's behavior from a woman's behavior, you just don't understand biology at all, right? And so there are fundamental differences between men and women, and that's going to manifest itself in the relationships between men and women, which makes the conversation for something, trying to tie it back to the Me Too movement, very, very complicated, because on the one side, it's very, very obvious, and I want to make this point very clear, and Scott already made this point, but just to repeat it again, that there are sexual inequalities that exist in many workplaces, that women do face unwanted sexual advances discrimination based on their sex and an environment that is much more predatory than men face. That is definitely the case. But at the same time, if you're going to say that, I don't know if I should get into this. This might be very controversial.
Go for it.
Okay, how do I phrase this? So the first thing is, I think that it's very good that there is a movement to uncover a lot of the inappropriate behaviors that men are taking within certain workplaces, and you leveraging these unequal gender dynamics toward, right? Exposing that, revealing that, recognizing it, and trying to limit that behavior is very important, and it's necessary because that behavior exists. At the same time, if we take an approach of not necessarily looking at the facts, always believing the woman no matter what, and just going on a witch hunt against every single man who's accused, regardless of what the evidence says, then that's a really unfair position to take. It's a radical position to take, and it doesn't fall back onto some of the fundamental principles in which our society is built on, including the idea of not trying to judge someone as being guilty of something before looking at all of the evidence. Sorry, I kind of like jumped all over there, but
well, and that's a very fascinating difference between conservatives and liberals, where typically someone on the far left is would disagree with what Steve just said. I think everyone recognizes that both sides should be heard at some level, whether or not they if it actually plays out that way. But I think everyone agrees. But you do see on the left some non-questioning occurring around some of the accusations. Different AQ word. Accusations. And on the conservative side, you see a very, very, very strong pushback saying, no, this is a witch hunt. This isn't fair. You're not, you're taking advantage of men. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. So I don't know if that's so much I wouldn't disagree with that statement. I don't know. I think it's just a moment that we live in that it's just like, it's an easy target and it's easy to rally around and it's easy to get social media attention around, and it just kind of builds off of itself.
But what's really weird about the current zeitgeist around this, to me, is that if you look at, say, a criminal case in which someone is accused of murdering another person, most liberals will justifiably say, hey, we need to wait to hear all the evidence before we cast judgment on this individual, right? And that's for a murderer, someone who is accused of ending someone else's life. And yet, when there is a sexual abuse case, typically, for people, again, on the radical end of the far left, would not afford the accused the same luxury, which is a very strange dynamic to me. It's a very troubling dynamic, I think.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I don't know why it is. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. But we've gotten far off topic because our topic was supposed to be masculinity, and now we're talking about the Me Too movement, and I don't think that's where we wanted to end. So I'll let you get back to the topic at hand, Scott.
Well, the see what you just brought is hard because I don't disagree with you.
To be a classical liberal is very difficult these days, right? Where you're on the left on most issues, but then if you take certain positions, and I think most of them tend to be around allowing for freedom, resisting groupthink, and then having some economic perspectives that might lean more into the conservative end. If you're in that perspective, the more traditional, like quote unquote European liberal perspective, you're shunned by everybody. right? Like nobody likes you.
See, that's why you need to. I think we're way off topic
We are.
now, but I want to say, um, actually, I can tie this back in. I will tie this back in.
Good luck.
Moving to Austin is maybe a good thing if you want to find people you're more politically aligned with, because I think you'd find in Texas. I'm saying you as in, you specifically, but also people similar to you. But also in Texas, you'd find people are more in the middle, or less, or more of a traditional liberal. And I want to tie it back in by saying that masculinity is also an extremely geographic element to it. I mean, you look out, and this is the fascinating thing actually. So I went to my ex-girlfriend 4 years ago, maybe, went out to Montana where she lived, and we drove out there, and I was wearing a purple shirt. Now, in the cities, people would not. A guy wearing a purple shirt is, I mean, it's nothing. There's nothing.
Yeah, it's totally
you
normal.
wouldn't notice that. It's totally normal. Pink shorts, purple shirt, whatever. I mean, it's. God, I could wear like a crop top. People wouldn't really look. Except for my amazing abs. And I'm joking. That would probably draw some looks in Minnesota. But there, in Montana, a guy wearing a purple shirt, they thought, we went into this little diner on the side of the highway in the middle of fucking nowhere, Montana. Because they had really good pie. They're known for their pie. Like, such a Montana thing. Like, you have to go here and it's known for its pie.
Great.
And it's like a 2-hour drive, but just down the street. I'm like, in Montana, 2 hours is just down the street. And, I got so many stares. So my girlfriend said, yeah, they all think you're gay.
Little did they know they were half correct.
Little did they know they're half right. But if I went into a place in the cities with my girlfriend, no one would ever think that. No one would ever think that, So it varies by geographic region, which makes it also hard to talk about masculinity and like why people have such varying perspectives, because it depends on where you grow up. And I think that little story, just like that shirt, just shows how significant it varies.
I can't believe how you tied this back to masculinity, but that's great.
Boom!
No, it's great.
I did it.
So do you think that there are kind of fundamental traits of masculinity?
Outside of growing facial hair? I don't really know.
Maybe let me rephrase that. Let me rephrase that. How would you define the differences between femininity and masculinity? What makes them different?
So how masculinity in my view has traditionally been defined is man doing what they want without as much regard for others. And femininity traditionally is the woman adopting to what the man expects or wants. And that should be pretty obvious to anyone, right? I mean, that's what it is, right? You look at it's women largely have been pressured to adopt the male expectation and to live up to the male gaze on what and how they should be. And my challenge with masculinity is that it's been defined as superior, just over time, because males have been the ones who make the decisions. Males are the one who say, and I'm talking over a long arc of history here, in America specifically. Males have just been the dominant culture. And females have always been defined as in their relationship to males. What does your husband do? Right? Where's your husband? Are you married? Do you have kids with your husband? It's always in relationship to the man. And I guess for me, what makes me really frustrated about that is it's in that traditional definition of masculinity and femininity and the relationship between the two, it's about what the man wants and how the woman can follow. And I'm really curious and how I really approach my form of masculinity is I want to figure out what the woman wants, what her interests are, what her aspirations are, career-wise, sexual, socially, and then figure out if we're compatible from that. And I feel that that's not common.
All right.
Steve was making faces at me while I was talking.
Yeah, I don't know where to start. I think it'll be easier if I kind of just lay out my own understanding of the differences and then go from there, and then we can try to see where we have similarities and disagreements. So the mating strategies of men and women are fundamentally different, right? So women have basically one fertile egg a month, and they have, I think, like 400 total throughout a lifetime. So 400 options in terms of being able to pass on their genetic material, right? Basic biology. Every animal is trying to pass on its genetic material, right? Evolution, all that shit. So the fundamental mating strategy for women is, women from the purely biological standing, women's reproductive strategy is fundamentally limited by the high investment cost of getting pregnant and having a child, right? Men's reproductive strategy is different. Men make thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of sperm all the time. They're just, just firing sprays of bullets. And they don't have any of the significant reproductive investment that women do. So male reproductive strategies are to spread their seed as much as possible. It's like a pretty commonly understood phenomenon, right? Women require that investment. They need to find, and again, I apologize for this seeming so traditional. I'm just saying this from the purely biological standpoint and not in terms of our current social standings. So I don't necessarily agree that the biology should dictate how our society is aligned. That's not what I'm saying, right? I want to make that very clear.
Because I don't want to interject really quickly because it doesn't explain why men decide whether or not women can vote, how they dress, and how they can
Of course not. And that's not at all what I'm saying.
Right,
I'm not saying any of those repressive statements are justified. I'm just starting from a baseline of saying that women's reproductive strategy requires finding a man who has good genes and will stick around and investing in that man because it's such an arduous process to have a child and invest in that child and bring that child up. You need someone who's going to stick around. For men, their biological imperative pushes them to try to mate with as many women as possible. Those two things are fundamentally at odds. And I think that a lot of the behavior that stems out of that reproductive battle between the two sexes in terms of which reproductive strategy wins out manifests itself in masculinity versus femininity, right? And so you can think of femininity in a sense of being more about nurturing and caring and supporting and developing social interactions and communities, and masculinity being more about individualism, bravery, sacrifice. I'm sure there are more. But what I mean by that is to say that I disagree with Scott's idea that the relationship between masculinity and femininity is simply one in which one dominates over the other. I think that there's been a constant engagement between two different somewhat conflicting reproductive strategies, reproductive imperatives rather, that has led to a shifting dynamic between what is considered masculine and what is considered feminine, and that those two things have grown together over time, right? It's not one side repressing the other. There is a shitty world out there, and we have two different strategies, but we have to find a way to make them work together to be able to continue the propagation of our species. So there are certain ways in which they directly conflict, and there are certain ways in which they are complementary and supportive, right? Does that make sense at all?
So why do chimpanzees have much more? So as our closest relative, and apes in general have much more social equality, in that the females have a lot more social capital.
Not chimps. No, they don't. Not chimps. No.
Yeah, they do.
No, bonobos do. Chimps do not.
Bonobos.
No, but it's different, right? And what's interesting there is that very small genetic differences lead to very, very different social hierarchies. So bonobos are such that they are I think they're more leaning toward a matriarchal society, and they use sex as a way to placate arguments and to establish social connections. Chimps have a rigid male-dominated hierarchy in which the certain like alphas get to dominate and have a larger number of females to select from. And I think humans are somewhere in between. So in terms of the masculine qualities I'm trying to get at is I think it's interesting because I think that masculinity in a lot of ways is not highly compatible with our current society. But is also fundamentally ingrained in the way that men engage with each other and their society. So, for instance, the ideas of honor and sacrifice and strength are fundamentally masculine traits.
I wouldn't go that far, but I think you're reaching a little beyond science with that. But
how do you mean?
I'm not entirely sure. If you looked at peer-reviewed literature, they would have a direct causal relationship between honor and being male.
You'd be hard-pressed to argue that honor throughout history isn't a predominantly male attribute.
Well, what the hell is honor? I mean, okay, let's put that aside because it goes into what the definition of honor is. But
I mean it more in the sense of pride and sacrifice, right? The idea that you're going to engage in a certain ritualized set of behavior for some abstract notion of self-worth that is worth more to you than your own life.
Well, so you've taken a very biological standpoint. So, like today, look at sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. I don't think you can take the biological factors that you're attributing and draw a straight line to how the sexes oriented themselves to each other today. Take, for example, sacrifice.
Yeah.
So women today.
No, 96% it could be higher of people in the U.S. military are men.
And why is that? What is one of the biggest reasons behind that?
So here's the thing. You're trying to say
women weren't allowed to be in the military.
Do you believe that if we didn't have that history, it would be 50-50?
So you interrupt me. So today, in most areas of the military, of the Navy, of the Air Force, do you need to have brute strength or do you need to be smart? So the way the society is moving, it is moving in a way that is completely, in almost every sector of our economy and our world, taking away those ideas of strength and sacrifice, as Steve defined in the biological aspect, and saying those don't really matter anymore. It don't really matter. That is one of the big issues in this country. What was the country built? It was built on strong men, out farmers, making cars, going to war, fighting in the front lines in the trenches. That was masculinity for a large part of American history. We've gotten to a point where we say, that doesn't really matter anymore. No, we want you to be really smart and sit behind a computer. And we want you to be able to really smart and program a drone. Those don't involve masculine traits anymore. Now, yes, there are still people on the front lines. I get that. But far fewer. We don't have massive military clashes anymore, and we never will. Again.
I'm confused. I don't know how this discounts my point about honor.
But what I'm getting now, okay, so let me get to it. So what does that mean? It means the definition, honor and sacrifice haven't gone away, but the definitions have grown so that both men and women can play in that area. Take sacrifice, for example. Okay? So traditionally, yeah, men sacrifice themselves. They'd go out, they'd get food for the family, they'd go to war to defend the females. Well, with the world we live in now, going out and getting food means going to Whole Foods. Defending the women means sitting behind a computer in a cyber warfare room. And what that means now is that women can say, well, I want to sacrifice as well, because they don't have to stay home and raise the kids. They can adopt a child. They don't have to have a male. They can get artificially inseminated. And so what I'm saying is that this idea of honor and sacrifice and pride are no longer endemically male. And society, our progression, you should appreciate this, because the technological transformation of society means it doesn't matter if you're male or female. You can have sacrifice or honor or pride or whatnot. We don't have these fights.
So
these
changing the definitions of honor and sacrifice doesn't mean that it discounts the fact that those are majority masculine traits. And what I mean by that, is sacrifice in the traditional. Wait, let me finish.
You're taking that honor and pride are not biological. Those are social constructs. Honor and pride
that are rooted.
Genes don't have an honor or pride.
Let me talk.
Of them.
So honor and pride are rooted in biology and the social dynamics that we developed over millennia as we evolved as a social species of hunter-gatherers, right? Part of this is biology. The conception of honor that we have is not something that chimps have in the same capacity, for instance. What I mean when I talk about sacrifice, right, is a very specific form of sacrifice. I'm not talking about spending a set amount of time to do something that you don't want to do, because that definition of sacrifice is valid for both sexes. Of course it is. If you're thinking about a time investment, women sacrifice way more in terms of what they sacrifice for child rearing than guys do for the family, right? Much more sacrifice. What I meant in terms of sacrifice specifically is sacrifice of their lives, because men are more disposable than women. Biologically, men are disposable relative to women, right? You can have significantly fewer men in a population to repopulate the society than you need women. Women are much more essential to a society. Men are fundamentally more what's the word? Sacrificial, like disposable. And so what I'm talking about here is not trying to figure out a way that we can redefine changing norms in our society. And I agree that norms are changing in our society, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that we have changing of norms. And it's a good thing that certain negative aspects of masculinity are moved to a point where we don't need them in our society. We don't need to be sending a bunch of young men out to die for the sake of this abstract notion of a nation anymore. We don't have the World War II dynamics. I mean, we still do. We still have war in certain places, but we don't have those dynamics that send a bunch of young men out to die. That's a good thing, but I don't think that discounts the fact that part of masculinity accounts for the fact that men are disposable, that men have this pervasive sense of honor for the tribe, that they will go out and sacrifice their lives disproportionately to women. That's part of their gender-based role throughout millennia. I think that it's ridiculous to say that that's purely a social construct, to go back and say, like, all those wars, all that time, through all those societies that developed somewhat semi-independently, they all chose, let's just happen to take majority men all the time and throw them out to war to kill each other, or to throw them out to war to go hunt. It's because they were disposable. There's a biological rooting in it. That's a fundamental proponent of what masculinity is.
And I agree with that. What I'm saying is that because it doesn't matter anymore, we're left in a place where men still feel that they should have pride and honor, but there really isn't a reason anymore for them to have it or gain it, because there's no threat.
That's the interesting thing I want to get to, is what does masculinity mean today in a way that's different from in the past, right? Because like I just want to get to a place where we can agree, Scott, that there are the traits that are fundamentally masculine that have some social proponent, but also a biological proponent, and that are different from feminine traits. I just want to get to that recognition first.
I agree with that. I'm interested in what it means for today. And I think...
But let's get a drink first. Because I'm empty.
Oh, okay, fine. I was just on a roll.
No, it's a good stopping point. We established this baseline. Now we're going to build on it. Let me get a drink.
Okay.
Scott, hurry up with your fancy drink. Scott. Oh, good, you're back. All right. So, Scott, before you jump into your point, could I just recap? I just want to clarify this notion of what masculinity entails, and I think to keep it really simple, it really entails kind of, in my mind, three different things. One is the notion of stoicism, right? As an individual, you don't really express your emotions, you just kind of bottle it up. The idea of being a provider, like you support and you protect, and then being a warrior, you sacrifice yourself for honor and bravery because you're fundamentally disposable. So I kind of see the umbrella of masculinity is wrapped, like in a rather simplistic sense, under those three umbrellas.
Did you look that up?
I did not, no. That was just what I was thinking through as I was grabbing my drink. We promised each other that we won't look up shit for this podcast. I don't look shit up.
I would say that's quite eloquently stated, Steve.
I've had several drinks to think through it while you making your 5-hour margarita or whatever the fuck you're drinking.
5-hour margarita. Hang on a second.
Does that make sense though? You agree with those ideas?
Well, I get the latter two. The stoicism one, I have trouble with that one because what's the biological foundation of that?
It's a good question.
I'm not sure if I agree with that one because I've traveled to other countries. Very different idea. That's like, I think that's more of an American Western maybe thing.
That could very well be true.
Like, conquering the frontier, you're stoic, you just go out there in the wild. Like, I've traveled quite a bit to Europe. I would not call the men there stoic.
But are they as expressive as women about their feelings and their emotions and in their engagements?
I not enough interactions, but they're far more expressive than American males.
Yeah. And I think that is an important note because it shows that although the broad sense of masculinity might apply across a wide spectrum of people, that culture really shapes individual personalities in a way that can significantly alter standard notions of what masculinity could be for any individual. I wouldn't go so far as saying everybody's sense of masculinity is unique and a special snowflake. I do think that there are fundamental biological underpinnings to what masculinity really entails, but I would say that culture can override that in a lot of different ways that can manifest themselves in different personality traits. But that recognition of masculinity and an acknowledgement of the biological underpinnings is important for any man who wants to be able to recognize where their actions and behaviors are coming from fully.
And I think that's a really interesting point because I was thinking we have a lot of other biological tendencies that we have to repress, right? In today's world because it's not. I mean, we have a biological tendency to eat everything because we don't know where the next meal is coming from.
And I still do.
And Steve still does when he works out. That is a biological tendency that we have a whole industry around suppressing. There are surgeries to repress that biological tendency. And a lot of money in that industry, too. So, and there's other, that just came to mind, and that's probably the biggest one. But also, you could talk about aggression being a much, you look at the world historically when there were weaker institutions, there's a lot of factors that play into it. The world historically was a much more violent place than it is today. And that's largely due to institutions such as, education, mm-hmm. law enforcement, positive law enforcement, rules and regulations, economic opportunity. There's a lot of other things that have been built and created to repress kind of biological tendencies of humans, and males in this case, with violence. And I find that interesting because we're talking about masculinity, and I'm wondering if we're talking about there's some innate characteristics of masculinity, if we need to start thinking, are there some aspects that we need to intentionally start repressing because they don't serve us anymore today?
So I think that is a number 4, actually, the one that you just brought up, aggression, that I wasn't thinking about before. But I think that is a generally masculine trait. Aggression, I think, is much more of a male trait than a female trait.
I want to touch on something because I just read an article. It was fascinating that more advanced species that can, mostly mammals, these are mostly mammals, mm-hmm. kill or ostracize members of their group that are more aggressive. Mm. There is documented instances across many different species of one member of that group, of that clique, acting out, not even killing someone else, it was just being more aggressive. Mm-hmm. And the society is saying, we don't want that. I mean, they're thinking this subconsciously. We don't want that in our gene pool. We're killing that.
This is mostly in primates, or?
Primates. It actually happens in hunter-gatherer societies as well. Like in the Amazon, it's actually been observed that there have been more aggressive males in these groups that haven't interacted with the outside modern world, that do select members of their group to keep out of the gene pool based on this undesirable factor of aggression.
So have you heard of the self-domestication theory of humans?
Well, there's the one about the fox in Russia. That's fascinating.
It is, yeah.
Just to recap the fox thing in Russia, I think it was in the USSR, I think it was a while ago. They kept breeding foxes, in the 80s, yeah. And they kept breeding foxes for like the one that was least likely to attack the human when the human came up, and they kept breeding those two who were least aggressive, and the fox became domesticated and actually developed cute, quote unquote, features by human standards and things we find attractive in domestic animals.
And very similar to dogs, like rounded ears, childlike features, wagging droopy tails, more coat variability, right? So you see this in like cows, for instance, or dogs, right? Size variability as well. Really, really interesting. It's almost like the genetic components that code for those certain traits are somehow fundamentally linked to behaviors of reduced aggression. But this also ties into the idea of human self-domestication, because there's a theory that human beings taking on the behavior that Scott just mentioned of ganging up and eliminating more aggressive members of tribes so that they cannot reproduce within the gene pool was a process that naturally occurred for self-domestication that led to current humans today. And humans, if you look against and compare against other primates, are significantly less aggressive. But not only that, we have significantly more childlike features. So it's almost like we are repressed in our development. If you look at the way that our noses and our jaws, and especially our teeth and claws, other fighting weapons, have developed, we're very infantile in that sense. And the theory is that this is a self-selection that led to a level of domestication that reduced aggression within the human population and allowed for increased collaboration, which allowed for future technological advancement in things like trade. So.
And I think how this relates to masculinity, and I think it's really fascinating. Also, we're getting a really controversial territory, and I'm not recommending this, but this idea about about selecting out members of the group. It's essentially natural selection, if you think about it, right? And selecting those members of society that would excel in the current world that you live in, and rejecting those who would not excel in the world you're living in, happened for thousands and thousands and millions of years. And we've gotten to a point in Western society, and mind, we're looking at 0.0001% of the biological continuum of history here, but we're at a point where we don't have that anymore. You can't say, you're aggressive, I'm going to go kill you. Or, you're not fitting into how this society is to work, we're going to kill you now. I mean, we're going to remove you from the gene pool. That's illegal and immoral by today's moral standards, right? To do that. And I'm not saying we would or would ever want to, but we've got to this point where vast changes have occurred in society, and I'm not sure. I mean, I think there are some people, and maybe it's more socioeconomic than biological, but there are some biological factors as well. I'm talking about masculinity. Like, some of those traits don't make any sense anymore in this current context. Like, we don't need some of them.
So let's talk about those traits. Which traits specifically do you think are no longer important within our current society?
Well, so you talked about pride.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you talked about pride, and you talked about, what were the other ones you talked about?
Pride, honor, self-sacrifice, stoicism, aggression, this provider mentality.
If you can draw historically a biological reason behind those traits, but that biological reason isn't in existence anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need those traits to survive.
Mm-hmm. Then
the question is, what purpose do they serve? Do they serve a positive purpose? Do they serve a negative purpose? Or do they serve a neutral purpose?
Yeah.
And I would argue that some of them serve a negative purpose. I think things like pride and honor among men in modern society may be, and I'm not drawing any causal relations here, but may help contribute to some of the abuse women suffer at the hands of men. And I mean that, physically, emotionally.
Well, it definitely does in certain repressive cultures, like in Saudi Arabia.
Well, look, I mean, that's a very clear example, right? I mean, like, men want to feel empowered, that honor, the pride, they're leading, they're providing, right? And I don't know much about Saudi Arabia. I should probably just stop talking there before I really dig myself into a hole. But I could see that aspect of Islam is really about empowering the male
at the expense of the female. And that there's a weird honor culture around, like, the virginity of women and what you do because the honor can be deeply tied to, for instance,
right,
like a virgin daughter, right? And then if they are quote unquote defiled, then that, like, reflects honor badly on the family. It's all this really fucked up, terrible shit that happens.
And that is an example of it not serving a good purpose.
Exactly. Like, so there are really perverted ways in which masculinity can be used as a repressive tool within society. That's something to escape. But I think one thing that's important to note is not all aspects of masculinity are negative.
I didn't say that. I said positive.
No, and I'm not saying that you said that. But I think that there is a tendency these days to see it as such. Right, that masculine traits are inherently negative, that you shouldn't be overly masculine. And so, for instance, the idea of being stoic, less feeling, independent individual, those things are seen by some people as a negative. I think it's really complicated. I think that... How do I explain this?
Well, something like stoicism, that's hard because in modern workplaces, now it's fine if you're stoic on the farm or stoic in the manufacturing line, but being stoic in a modern white-collar workplace that thrives on interpersonal relationships being developed quickly and trust being developed quickly, that's hard. That is harder to match.
It's not beneficial in most environments, because the fast pace of work and the need for communication to accomplish tasks that require multiple people on them do not lend themselves toward individualism, stoicism, that kind of thing. It's much more effective to have people who are more collaborative, socially engaged, empathetic, understanding of people, and those are naturally feminine traits, right? And so it's an interesting reversal in which we see a dynamic where feminine traits are seen as more highly valued within our more interconnected society and interconnected businesses than our more masculine traits of things like individualism, stoicism, repression of emotion, right? And it's a good place for men to see how learned behavior can allow for an adaptation to improve on some of the shortcomings. But I also think that it is important to not discount those traits outright in and of themselves. I think it's important to see the context-specific benefits of them.
I think it's a fascinating conversation when you look at what men are struggling, and those who grow up in liberal, white, urban, upper class households are doing a lot better. And if you look at the traits of, for example, men who grow up in that type of environment, they're much more empathetic. They're much more collaborative. They communicate more.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a generalization than people who grew up in rural America, who grew up lower middle class, who grew up with parents in manufacturing.
Yeah, so this is one of the big things that I wanted to get to is why are men struggling with their own masculinity and being able to use that productively within society today. And like you're saying, it's a specific subset of men who haven't been able to adapt additional perspectives into the way that they engage with other people. And typically people who are more well educated have been able to adapt a little bit better. But yeah, continue. What were you saying? I totally.
And that's all I was saying. I think, and that's a huge challenge. And you know, you could partly say that's why Trump was elected. I mean, you can say a lot of things are why Trump was elected, but that's one of those people like, I don't know how to fit in. My skills, my outlook, my view on life doesn't work anymore. It's not making me money. It's not being rewarded anymore.
I think it's that, and then add on to that this notion where a lot of men see self-worth in their ability to provide, right? And I think this is a fundamental masculine trait, that you want to be a provider, you want to be able to support your family, that despite all the blows that you take, you're able to stand up again and face the world and support the people around you. Like it's a trait that a lot of men face, and I'm not saying that that's only something that men experience, but I think that disproportionately men are impacted by their lack of that ability to succeed within what is their perceived sense of their role given their family and their community, right? Right, like let's say you're this guy who is in one of a rural town that was a factory town and it fell apart, and you used to be a factory worker who can support their family and did your role in your society with your community, and you sacrificed your health to go into the factory and work with dangerous materials. You lose all of that. You're not just losing your income. You're losing your essence as a man. And I know how contrived that seems in liberal society today to say like, oh, fuck your, like, antiquated notions of being a man, just like learn to code and grow up or whatever. But I think there's really like a deep-rooted biological urge for men to have this ability to provide, like as part of this masculine like identity. And I think it's really easy for people to see that and scoff and just be like, get into the 21st century. Like, why are you being so antiquated about your role as a man? And I understand that too, because there are a lot of aspects of masculinity that are toxic and detrimental to the way our society is progressing. But at the same time, we have to recognize that these fundamental desires, some of them at least, are rooted in biology and lead to the capacity for certain men to be able to achieve extraordinary things. Like,
I wanna finish and say this is a really interesting topic, that a different way of looking at making policy. So when liberals are in power in states and cities and at the national level, it's exactly as Steve said, that it's like grow up, adopt to the new way of being a man in today's society.
Which means what exactly?
Well, that's the question. I mean, what does that actually mean? I mean, it
doesn't mean anything.
More. It doesn't mean a lot, and that's a whole other topic because we still have issues, right? Now, without, and I personally, as someone, I'm like, I'll stay home. I'll be a stay-at-home dad with a wife that brings in all of the money. Now, if you went to half of America and said the same thing, both the man and the woman would say, no, that's not how, that doesn't work. And policymakers need to recognize that rejection of what we call liberal norms isn't solely due to lack of education, to lack of prospects. It is partially due, and not all of it, partially due to biological factors that are still at play, along with a lot of societal ones. I get that. There's a lot of society. I mean, it's not going to discount any of that, but there are pieces of it that are biological that need to be recognized and in some ways honored and understood better than they are, at the very least, not maligned.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's the big thing, is you can't just attack people for wanting to have a more traditional relationship with women. And it's like, and there's a lot of negative aspects, but and more, if keeping it positive, you can't malign people for wanting to be the breadwinner and have the wife stay home and watch the kids.
Yeah.
That works for some people.
I think that's a great place to end it. I will say that we have just scratched the surface of this topic. We've jumped around quite a lot because there is so much to talk about when it comes to gender relations and dynamics and where we are today. But I think that does a good job of kind of painting a broad brush around some of these topics. And so thank you for that great ending there, Scott. Why don't we wrap it up here, and then we can revisit this topic at a future date. Because there's a lot we left on the table.
We covered a lot of what we think. I think it is unqualified opinion here, but what we think of kind of the past.
Yeah.
But there's also now, right?
We didn't really get
we didn't touch
enough into that. Yeah, and we should.
Outside of the sex.
Yes.
Right.
All right.
All right. Sounds good.